The evening sun stretched across the small house, painting the walls in warm shades of orange and gold. Laura stood in front of her mirror, slowly slipping out of her blouse after a long day. She sighed, her reflection revealing not only her tiredness, but also the quiet loneliness that had been her companion for far too long. Years of sacrifices had given her a grace, a beauty softened by time. Yet tonight, that beauty seemed cloaked in solitude. She thought she was alone in the house, lost in her own thoughts, as she reached for a fresh dress. But then, the door creaked open. Laura's heart jumped as she turned sharply, clutching the fabric to her chest. Standing in the doorway was Michael, her late husband's closest friend, the man who had quietly helped her with repairs around the house, who always checked in on her since she became a widow. His eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, both of them froze. "Laura." His voice was low, uncertain, as though he hadn't expected to find her like this. Her breath caught. "Michael, I thought you had already left." She tried to sound calm, but her voice trembled. He started to back away, muttering an apology. But there was something in his expression that made her pause. It wasn't just embarrassment. There was something else in his eyes, something unspoken, heavy and forbidden. Laura's chest tightened. She wanted to dismiss it, pretend it never happened. But even as he hurriedly closed the door, the look lingered in her mind, unsettling and impossible to ignore. That evening, the house felt different. Every sound, every glance between them carried a strange, new tension. At dinner, Michael was unusually quiet. He avoided her gaze, but when their eyes met, it was fleeting, almost guilty, almost longing. Laura forced herself to keep the conversation light, talking about groceries, the garden, the weather, ordinary things. Yet beneath her calm smile, her heart was racing. Later that night, as she sat on the couch, Laura replayed that moment by the mirror. She told herself it was nothing, just a misunderstanding. But deep inside, she knew it was not that simple. Something had shifted between them, something neither of them had the courage to name. The night deepened, and the silence in the small house grew heavy. Laura sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The ticking of the clock seemed louder than usual, each second stretching into eternity. She told herself she should go to bed, but her body refused to move. When Michael returned from the kitchen, carrying a glass of water, she felt her breath hitch. He set it down on the table, careful not to meet her eyes at first. But then slowly he did. Their gazes locked. It was only a second, yet it felt like a confession. "Are you all right, Laura?" His voice was gentle, almost hesitant, as though he was afraid of the answer. She nodded quickly. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her throat was dry. The silence between them stretched, charged with something neither of them dared to name. Michael's hand rested on the table, his fingers brushing the rim of the glass. Laura found herself staring at that hand, remembering all the times those same hands had fixed her broken fence, carried heavy boxes, or quietly brought her groceries when he thought she wasn't looking. He had always been there. Always too close and yet impossibly distant. "I should go," Michael murmured, finally, his voice low. But he didn't move. Laura's heart pounded. She wanted to tell him yes, to urge him to leave, to escape this unbearable tension. But another part of her, the part that had been lonely for far too long, wanted him to stay. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, the moment lingered, fragile, dangerous, and alive. Finally, Michael stood his chair, scraping softly against the floor. "Good night, Laura," he said, his tone carrying a weight she couldn't quite name. "Good night," she replied, though her voice was barely audible. When the door closed behind him, Laura leaned back against the couch, pressing a trembling hand against her chest. She told herself it was wrong that she was imagining things, that Michael was just being kind. But her heart betrayed her, racing with the truth she wasn't ready to face, because in his eyes, she hadn't seen just kindness. She had seen a longing that mirrored her own, and she knew deep inside that nothing between them would ever be the same again. The following days passed in a blur of routine, yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. Laura tried to carry on as if life had not shifted that night, but her heart refused to forget. Every time she walked through the hallway, every time she caught her reflection in the mirror, she was reminded of Michael's eyes, gentle, searching, filled with something unspoken. By the third day, he was back at her door. "Your garden gate's loose again," he said casually, holding a small toolkit in his hand. "Thought I'd fix it before it falls apart." Laura hesitated at the doorway, her breath catching. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think it was just neighborly kindness. But deep inside, she knew he didn't come for the gate. As he worked outside, Laura found herself watching from the kitchen window. His movements were steady, strong, practiced. She remembered the way her late husband used to handle the same tools, and the thought stirred a mix of gratitude and guilt inside her. When Michael finally stepped into the kitchen to wash his hands, the air between them thickened. The scent of earth and soap clung to him, familiar, yet dangerous. "You don't have to do all this for me," Laura said softly, handing him a towel. He dried his hands, but instead of answering right away, he looked at her. Really looked at her. "Maybe I don't," he admitted. His voice was quiet, almost a confession. "But I want to." Laura's chest tightened. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. Words tangled on her tongue. She wanted to thank him, to ask him to stop, to tell him she couldn't bear this confusion. But when she finally spoke, all that came out was Michael. Her voice trembled, and his name lingered in the air like a secret. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence was alive, pulsing with everything they hadn't said. Then, as if realizing how close he had come to crossing a line, Michael stepped back. "I should get going," he said quickly, though his eyes betrayed his reluctance. Laura nodded, though part of her wanted to call him back. She stood frozen as he left, the echo of his footsteps fading into the distance. But that night, when she lay awake staring at the ceiling, Laura knew the truth she didn't dare say aloud. Michael would come back. And when he did, she wasn't sure she'd be strong enough to turn him away. The following week, Michael showed up again. This time it was the old light fixture in the hallway. Daniel mentioned the wiring's been acting up. He explained, holding a box of tools. "Thought I'd take a look before it causes trouble," Laura's lips parted, but she didn't argue. She knew she could call an electrician. She knew Michael didn't have to do this. But she also knew she didn't want to stop him. As he climbed the small ladder, his shirt clung to his back, the muscles in his arms shifting with each turn of the screwdriver. Laura tried not to look, but her eyes betrayed her. She busied herself with folding laundry on the couch, though her hands trembled with every sound of metal against metal. "Could you hold the flashlight for me?" Michael asked suddenly. Her heart jumped. "Of course," she said, rising quickly. She steadied the light as he worked above her, their shoulders brushing each time he leaned closer. The warmth of his body, the faint scent of soap and sawdust. It was too much too near. At one point, the ladder wobbled, and Michael's hand shot out, gripping her arm for balance. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. His hand lingered just a moment longer than necessary, his touch firm, grounding, and unbearably intimate. Laura swallowed hard. "You should be careful," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. Michael climbed down slowly, standing close, too close. He didn't let go of her arm right away. "I'll be careful," he murmured, his gaze locked on hers. "As long as you are too," the words hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Laura's breath came shallow, her fingers tightening around the flashlight. She knew she should step back, create distance, remind him of the lines neither of them should cross. But she couldn't move. Not when his presence wrapped around her like a storm she had no strength to fight. Finally, Michael pulled away his jaw, tight, his hands clenching at his sides. "The wiring's fine for now," he said gruffly, almost as if he was trying to steady himself. "But I'll come back to check again in a few days." Laura only nodded, afraid her voice would betray her. When the door closed behind him, she pressed her back against the wall, her heart pounding wildly. The house felt emptier than ever without him, and yet the echo of his touch burned on her skin. She whispered to herself, "This can't happen." But deep down, she already knew it was too late. That Friday evening, the air carried the faint scent of rain. Laura was in the kitchen preparing tea when the knock came. She opened the door to find Michael, his shirt damp from the drizzle, holding a small bag of groceries. "I was at the store," he said simply, his voice low. "Thought you might need a few things." Laura's heart clenched. It was such a small gesture, yet it carried a weight that left her unsteady. "You didn't have to," she whispered. "I wanted to," he replied, meeting her gaze with quiet intensity. Inside the house felt warmer with him there. They shared tea in the living room, the soft patter of rain against the windows, filling the silences between their words. Michael sat across from her, yet his presence felt too near his eyes, lingering a moment too long each time she looked up. "You've been alone too much, Laura," he said after a pause, his tone carrying both concern and something deeper. "You take care of everyone, but who takes care of you?" The question struck her like a chord. Her throat tightened, and she looked down at her hands resting in her lap. "I manage," she murmured. "I always have." Michael leaned forward, his voice rougher now. "But you shouldn't have to. You deserve more than just managing." Her breath trembled. She wanted to argue, to remind him of all the reasons this conversation shouldn't even exist. But when she lifted her eyes, she saw the storm in his longing restraint and something dangerously close to love. Michael. She spoke his name like a plea, like a warning. He clenched his hands together as though holding himself back. I don't want to make this harder for you. I keep telling myself to stay away, but Laura... His voice broke slightly. Every time I see you, it's harder to leave. The room fell silent, heavy, with words unspoken. Laura's heart pounded so loud, she was sure he could hear it. Her fingers gripped the edge of her cup, trembling. You can't say things like that, she whispered. Though her voice lacked conviction, I know Michael admitted. His gaze softened, but his jaw stayed tight, fighting against something he could no longer hide. But I can't lie to myself anymore either. For a long moment, they just sat there, the rain outside echoing the storm within them. Laura finally rose, setting her cup down with hands that shook. It's late. You should go, she said, her voice quiet, almost breaking. Michael stood slowly, as if each step away from her cost him more than he could bear. At the door, he paused, turning back. His eyes held hers for one last moment. Good night, Laura, he whispered, his voice carrying everything he couldn't say. When the door closed, Laura pressed her hand against her chest, tears welling in her eyes. She had asked him to leave, yet every part of her ached for him to stay. And in that moment, she realized the truth. This wasn't just loneliness anymore. It was something far more dangerous. The storm came without warning. Thunder rolled across the sky, and soon the lights in Laura's house flickered. Once, twice, then went dark. She lit a single candle in the living room, its flame casting trembling shadows across the walls. The sound of rain hammered against the windows, and for the first time in years, the house felt too quiet, too empty. Then came a knock. Her heart skipped. When she opened the door, Michael stood there, soaked from the storm, his hair damp, his jacket clinging to him. Power's out on my street too, he explained, holding up a small flashlight. His eyes searched hers, hesitant. I thought, maybe you'd need company. Laura hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in, she whispered. The candlelight painted his features in warm gold, softening the sharpness of his jaw, making him seem both stronger and more vulnerable. He set the flashlight on the table, but didn't turn it on. Instead, the two of them sat close by the small flame, listening to the rain and thunder outside. For a while, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was heavy, charged, alive. Michael's gaze lingered on her face, then drifted to her hands, folded tightly in her lap. Finally, his voice broke the stillness. Does it ever get easier? Laura turned to him, startled. What do you mean, being alone? He said softly. His eyes stayed fixed on the candle flame. Waking up in a quiet house, going to bed in one. Pretending the silence doesn't eat at you. Her chest tightened. She wanted to deny it, to pretend she was stronger than that. But in the fragile glow of the candle, lies felt impossible. No, she admitted, her voice trembling. It doesn't. Their eyes met again, and in that instant, the air seemed to shift. The storm outside faded into nothing, leaving only the sound of their breathing. Michael's hand moved slightly, as though reaching toward hers, then stopped halfway, hovering in the charged space between them. His restraint was palpable, painful. Laura's heart raced. She should have pulled away, should have broken the moment before it grew dangerous. But she didn't. She stayed still, caught in the gravity of him. Finally, Michael whispered, "Laura." Her name sounded like a confession, like a prayer. She closed her eyes, her voice barely audible. "We can't," I know, he said quickly, though the roughness in his tone betrayed his struggle. His hand lingered a breath away from hers, trembling with everything he wanted to say, but couldn't. The candle flickered, casting their shadows together on the wall, close, almost touching. And though no line was crossed that night, both of them knew the truth. They were standing at the edge of something neither could walk away from. The morning after the storm, the sun broke through the clouds, spilling light across the damp garden. Laura stood by the window, with a cup of tea in her hands, her thoughts tangled, like the branches still dripping with rain. She replayed the night again and again, the flicker of the candle, the way Michael's hand hovered so close to hers, the sound of her own voice whispering, "We can't." But beneath that memory was another truth she hadn't wanted him to stop. Her chest tightened at the thought. Just then, a knock came at the door. She froze, her heart racing, even before she opened it. Michael stood there, holding a bag of fresh bread and fruit. His smile was tentative, his eyes shadowed with the weight of what they hadn't said. "Good morning," he murmured. Laura hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. The kitchen filled with the scent of warm bread as he unpacked the bag, moving with a quiet familiarity that both comforted and unsettled her. "You didn't have to," she began. "I wanted to." He interrupted softly, echoing the same words he had spoken before. This time he didn't look away when their eyes met. Laura's breath caught. She turned quickly to the kettle, pretending to busy herself. "Michael, we need to talk." He leaned against the counter, his gaze steady, almost unshakable. "I know," he said, "but if I say what I want to, I'll only make it harder for you." Her hands trembled as she set the cups down. "Then don't say it," she whispered, though her voice betrayed the longing she fought to hide. For a long moment, silence hung between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Then Michael stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I can't keep pretending, Laura," he said, his voice low, almost breaking. "Every time I see you, it feels like I'm crossing a line I swore I'd never touch. But I can't help it anymore. I care about you more than I should." Her heart pounded, tears stinging her eyes. She shook her head, whispering, "You shouldn't." "But I do," he cut in, his tone fierce yet tender. "And you feel it too. Don't tell me you don't." Laura's lips parted, but no words came. Because in that fragile, dangerous moment, she knew he was right. She had felt it in every glance, every silence, every heartbeat since that night by the mirror. Her voice trembled. "Michael." If we let this happen, there's no going back. He stepped even closer, his eyes burning with restrained longing. Maybe there's nothing to go back to. The space between them seemed to vanish, and Laura's world tilted. She closed her eyes, fighting the storm inside her, because for the first time in years, she wasn't just lonely, she was alive. The following days, Laura threw herself into routine. She worked longer hours, busied her hands in the garden, and filled the silence of the house with the hum of old songs on the radio. Anything to avoid the weight of what had been said in the kitchen. She needed space. She needed to breathe. But no matter how hard she tried, Michael lingered in her thoughts, the look in his eyes, the firmness in his voice, when he said he cared about her more than he should. On the third evening, as the sun slipped below the horizon, there was another knock on the door. Laura's heart sank when she saw him standing there, holding a small box of tools again. "The fence by your garden is falling apart," he said. "I thought I'd fix it before it gets worse." "Michael." Her voice was soft, almost pleading. "You don't have to keep coming here. I can manage." His jaw tightened, and for a moment he didn't answer. Then slowly, he stepped inside, setting the tools down with a quiet thud. "Laura, I need you to understand something," he said, his voice low but steady. "This isn't about fences or light fixtures or groceries. I come here because I want to see you, because I care about you." Laura turned away, her fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. "Don't say that," she whispered. "If you keep saying it, I won't know how to stop myself from—" Her words caught unfinished. Michael moved closer, his tone rough with emotion. "Stop yourself from what, Laura? From feeling the same thing I do." Her breath trembled. She shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "This isn't right. People will talk. Daniel doesn't have to know." Michael cut in, his voice, softer now, almost pleading. "And even if he did, what we feel isn't something to be ashamed of. I've tried to fight it, Laura. I really have. But every time I see you, it only grows stronger. That's not weakness, that's truth." Laura closed her eyes, her chest aching. "You make it sound so simple." "Because it is," he said, stepping closer until she could feel his warmth. "Life is too short to keep running from what's real." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The ticking of the clock, the rustle of leaves outside, even her own breathing faded, leaving only the sound of his words echoing in her chest. When she finally opened her eyes, Michael was standing inches away, his gaze locked on hers, unwavering. Laura's hands shook, torn between pulling him closer and pushing him away. Her heart screamed one truth, while her mind clung desperately to another. And in that fragile moment, she realized she was no longer certain which side would win. The next morning, Laura stood by the sink, rinsing the breakfast dishes. Her reflection in the window showed a woman trying to look composed, but the tremble in her hands betrayed her. She knew what she had to do. When Michael appeared again that afternoon, this time with a bundle of fresh firewood, Laura met him at the door before he could even step inside. "Michael," she said firmly, though her voice wavered at the edges. "This has to stop." He blinked, taken aback. "Stop what? You? Coming here every day? Fixing things that don't need fixing? Finding reasons to stay?" She swallowed hard, gripping the doorknob tightly, as though it could anchor her. It's confusing. For me. For you. And if we keep letting this go on... Her voice faltered. I'm afraid of where it will lead. For a long moment, Michael didn't answer. The silence between them stretched, filled with everything neither of them wanted to admit. Finally, he set the firewood down by the porch, his movements slow, deliberate. You think I'm here out of duty? He said, quietly, his eyes locked on hers. But I'm not. I come because I want to. Because being near you feels like the only thing that makes sense anymore. Laura shook her head, fighting the heat rising in her chest. Don't say that. If you care about me at all, you'll respect what I'm asking. Michael stepped closer, his voice low, steady. Respect, Laura. I've respected your distance for years. I've stood on the sidelines, telling myself I was just your late husband's friend, that I had no right to feel more. But these last weeks, he stopped, his jaw tightening. I can't pretend anymore. And neither can you. Her breath trembled, her heart slamming against her ribs. You don't know what you're asking of me. I'm not asking for anything, Michael said firmly. I just need you to know the truth. If you tell me to leave, I will. But don't fool yourself into thinking my absence will make this easier. Because whether I'm here or not, you'll still feel it. Just like I do. The words struck deep, leaving Laura shaken. She wanted to deny it, to shut the door and end the conversation, but her hand refused to move. Because in her chest, where her heart beat too fast, she knew he was right. Michael's eyes softened. Tell me you don't feel it, Laura. Look me in the eye and tell me, and I'll never come back. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her throat tightened, betraying her silence. And in that silence, Michael found his answer. He stepped back slowly, giving her the space she thought she wanted. Though his gaze lingered heavy. With the truth, neither of them could deny. When the door finally closed between them, Laura leaned against it, her whole body trembling. She had asked him to stay away, yet the house already felt colder, emptier. And for the first time, she admitted to herself the one thing she had tried so hard to bury without Michael. She wasn't sure she could face the loneliness again. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Michael kept his word. He didn't come. No knocks on the door at dusk. No warm voice asking if she needed anything. No quiet laughter filling the empty corners of the house. Laura told herself this was good, that it was exactly what she wanted. She cooked, she cleaned, she busied herself with every little chore she could find. Yet at night, when the lamps flickered and the rooms grew still, the loneliness pressed harder than ever. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, her eyes drifted toward the window. She found herself waiting, hoping for the sound of footsteps outside, for the sight of Michael's familiar shadow moving across the porch. But the night stayed quiet. She let out a shaky breath, her hands tightening around the warm mug. Why does it feel emptier now than it ever did before? The truth was cruel in its simplicity. She missed him. She missed the way his presence steadied her, the way his gaze lingered like a silent promise. She missed the comfort of knowing she wasn't carrying the weight of her days alone. By the third night, sleep had abandoned her entirely. She tossed beneath the covers, her mind replaying every word, every glance, every stolen moment that had passed between them. The memory of his voice, low, firm, trembling with truth, echoed in her head. "Tell me you don't feel it, Laura. Look me in the eye and tell me." She had tried. God, she had tried. But the lie refused to leave her lips. With a restless sigh, Laura rose from bed and paced the quiet living room. She stopped by the door, her hand brushing over the knob. For a moment, she imagined opening it, stepping into the night, and walking straight to Michael's house. She could almost see him sitting alone, maybe just as sleepless as she was, but her courage faltered. Instead, she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "He's gone because you told him to go," she reminded herself. "You wanted this. You chose this." And yet, beneath the weight of her own words, her heart whispered a truth she could no longer ignore. She didn't just want Michael near. She needed him. The realization was terrifying, because now the question wasn't whether she felt it too. It was whether she would ever be brave enough to face it. It was late in the evening when the storm rolled in. Thunder cracked through the night sky, shaking the little house as heavy rain pounded against the windows. Laura tried to stay calm, but when the lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely, her chest tightened with panic. She lit a candle, the soft flame trembling as much as her hands. The silence of the powerless house felt suffocating, broken only by the howling wind outside. She pulled a blanket around her shoulders, telling herself she was fine, just fine. But then came the sound. A sharp crash from the back of the house. Her heart lurched. She froze, listening. The rain could explain some of it. Maybe a loose branch, maybe the wind. But when another thud followed closer this time, fear spread cold through her veins. Laura's hand shook as she reached for the phone. Dead. No signal. The storm had cut everything. Before she could decide what to do, a loud knock rattled the front door. She gasped, nearly dropping the candle. "Laura," the voice was deep, urgent, Michael's. Relief surged through her so suddenly it made her knees weak. She rushed to the door and pulled it open, and there he was soaked to the bone, rain dripping from his hair, his eyes blazing with worry. "I saw the lights go out from my place," he said breathlessly. "I couldn't just sit there. Are you all right?" For a moment, Laura couldn't answer. Her throat tightened as she stared at him, this man who had promised to stay away, who had kept his word until now, until danger called him back to her. I'm fine," she whispered, though her trembling voice betrayed her. Michael stepped inside without hesitation, closing the door against the storm. He reached for her shoulders, steadying her, as if sensing the fear she tried to hide. "You're shaking," he said softly. "You don't have to be alone through this." Something inside her broke. Then the wall she had fought so hard to keep standing. She felt the warmth of his hands, the strength in his presence, and she knew she couldn't deny it any longer. Her eyes met his, shimmering in the candlelight. "Michael?" Her voice cracked. "I don't know if I can keep pushing you away." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The storm raged outside, but in the quiet of that small room, it was only them, the truth. finally slipping through the cracks. Michael's grip tightened ever so slightly, his voice low, almost trembling. "Then don't, Laura. Don't push me away anymore." The words hung between them, fragile but unstoppable, like the storm outside. And Laura realized with terrifying clarity that the choice she had been running from was no longer hers to avoid. The storm showed no mercy. Rain hammered against the roof like an endless drum, and the wind howled through the trees, outside bending them until they groaned. Inside the little house was dimly lit by the flicker of a single candle, its flames swaying in rhythm with the storm's fury. Michael had taken off his soaked jacket, draping it over a chair. His shirt clung damp to his skin, outlining the strength in his frame. Laura tried not to stare, but her eyes betrayed her, drawn to him as if against her will. He busied himself at the fireplace, stacking wood and coaxing a flame to life. Soon warmth began to spread through the room, a fragile comfort against the chaos outside. Better, Michael murmured, brushing rain from his hair before turning toward her. His gaze lingered on her face, catching the way her shoulders were still trembling beneath the blanket. "Come closer to the fire." Laura hesitated, then moved to sit on the rug near the hearth. The glow painted her features in soft gold shadows, dancing across her cheekbones. She clutched the blanket tighter, but no fabric could protect her from the storm inside her chest. Michael sat down beside her, not too close, not yet. The space between them throbbed with unspoken words, louder than the thunder outside. For a while they sat in silence, listening to the fire crackle. But Laura could feel his presence, solid, steady, and unbearably near. Finally she spoke, her voice low. "I thought I could do this. Live without you here. Pretend it was safer that way." She swallowed hard. "But it's lonelier than I've ever known. And when the lights went out tonight, the first thing I wished for was you." Michael's breath caught his eyes burning with something raw and unguarded. "Laura," she turned to face him, her pulse racing. "I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know what we are becoming. But I can't deny it anymore. I feel it every time you look at me." The firelight flickered in his gaze as he leaned closer, his voice breaking into a whisper. "I felt it for years. I just never thought you'd let me close enough to say it." Their words hung in the charged air, fragile yet unstoppable. The thunder roared, the rain pounded, but neither of them moved away. Laura's blanket slipped slightly from her shoulders, and Michael's hand reached instinctively to steady it. His fingers brushed against her skin, warm despite the storm, and the touch was enough to unravel the last of her defenses. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. The storm outside had become a mirror of the storm, within wild, uncontrollable, inevitable. And in that moment, sitting side by side in the fire's glow, they both knew the line they had fought so hard to keep had already blurred beyond return. The fire had grown steady, its warmth filling the room, but the storm outside raged on with no sign of calming. The little house felt cut off from the world, as if only the two of them existed. Laura and Michael, bound together by the flickering light and the silence thick with everything unspoken. Laura's heart pounded painfully as Michael's hand lingered where it had brushed her shoulder. His touch was gentle, almost hesitant, but it carried a weight she could no longer ignore. She turned her face toward him, and in the firelight, their eyes met fully. No more hiding, no more retreating. Her breath trembled. "Michael," he leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me to stop, and I will. But if you don't," his words caught the rawness of them, almost breaking, "then I can't hold back any longer." Laura closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the storm beating against the walls, the fire crackling between them, the unbearable ache in her chest. She should say no. She knew she should. But when her lips parted, the word never came. Instead, she whispered, "Don't stop." That was all it took. Michael's restraint shattered. His hand cupped her face, warm and firm, pulling her toward him until their lips met. The kiss was hesitant at first, soft searching, but quickly deepened, fueled by years of silence and longing finally set free. Laura's blanket slipped completely from her shoulders, forgotten as she leaned into him, her fingers clutching at his shirt. The world outside roared the storm, unrelenting, but inside the fire burned brighter, echoing the heat building between them. Every barrier they had clung to crumbled in that moment. Every unspoken feeling found its voice in the way he held her, the way she responded without hesitation. When at last they pulled apart, breathless, Laura's forehead rested against his. Her chest rose and fell with the weight of what had just happened. "We can't go back now," she whispered, her voice unsteady but certain. Michael's hand slid to the back of her neck, steadying her. His eyes were fierce but tender. "I don't want to go back. Not ever." The firelight wrapped around them. The storm raged outside, but for the first time in years, Laura didn't feel alone. She felt alive, terrified, overwhelmed, but undeniably alive. And she knew, as Michael's arms tightened around her, that nothing between them would ever be the same again. Morning crept in quietly, the storm having finally spent its fury. The house smelled of damp wood and smoke from the fire that had burned through the night. Soft light filtered through the curtains, painting the room in pale gold. Laura stirred the weight of warmth pressed against her, reminding her instantly that she was not alone. Michael's arm was draped protectively around her, his chest rising and falling steadily at her back. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes and sink into the comfort, to feel the safety she hadn't known in years. But then reality came rushing back. Her breath caught as the events of the night replayed in her mind. The firelight, the storm, the kiss, the way her resolve had shattered beneath his touch. She had let herself fall completely and without hesitation. And now, nothing was the same. Carefully, she shifted, slipping from his embrace. Michael stirred, but didn't wake his hand, brushing the empty space where she had been. Laura stood by the window, pulling the blanket tightly around her shoulders, staring out at the quiet aftermath of the storm. Her heart ached with conflicting truths. What they had shared was real, powerful, undeniable. But it was also dangerous because once spoken, once acted upon, feelings like this could never be taken back. Behind her, Michael's voice broke the silence, low, husky from sleep. "You're up early." She turned slightly, meeting his gaze. He looked different in the morning light, vulnerable, yet steady his eyes, holding none of the regret she feared. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted softly. Michael sat up, running a hand through his hair, watching her closely. "Laura? Don't tell me you're regretting it." Her throat tightened. "I don't know what to feel. Last night, it was everything I've been afraid of, and everything I've wanted." Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "But where does it leave us now?" Michael rose slowly and crossed the room to stand before her. His hand brushed her arm, grounding her trembling. "It leaves us with the truth," he said firmly. "We can't pretend anymore. We crossed that line, yes, but maybe that's where we were always meant to be." Laura's chest tightened, torn between fear and longing. "It won't be easy. People won't understand." "I don't care what people think," Michael said, his gaze unwavering. "What matters is you, us. Tell me you feel it too, and I'll face whatever comes." Her lips trembled, the words caught between caution and surrender. And though fear still weighed heavy, she couldn't deny what had already been written in her heart. "I feel it," she whispered. "More than I want to admit." Michael's eyes softened, relief flickering across his face as he pulled her into his arms. Outside, the world was washed clean by the storm, but inside, Laura knew they were standing at the edge of something far more dangerous and far more beautiful than either of them had imagined. The days after the storm carried a strange kind of brightness. The air was fresher, the skies clearer, and for the first time in years, Laura felt something inside her lift, like a weight she had carried alone had finally been shared. Michael kept coming, but not as the cautious visitor he once was. Now his presence was bolder, his eyes meeting hers without shame, his hand brushing against hers without retreat. At first it was the smallest gestures, the way he lingered at the door a little longer, the way his voice softened when he said her name. But soon those moments grew into something neither of them tried to hide. Laura found herself smiling more. She hummed when she cooked her steps lighter as she moved about the house. In the evenings, she and Michael sat by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. And sometimes, when words failed, they simply leaned into the silence, his hand wrapped securely around hers. Yet beneath the sweetness, fear lingered like a shadow. At night, when she lay awake, Laura thought about the world beyond the walls of her home. The neighbors, the whispers, the questions, no answer could silence. She imagined faces turning voices, lowering judgment, cutting into something fragile and new. One afternoon, as she folded laundry, she caught herself humming again. The sound startled her, reminding her of the loneliness she had lived with for so long. How quickly he's changed everything, she thought, her chest tightening. And how quickly it could all be taken away. Michael noticed her quietness that evening. As they shared dinner, he reached across the table, brushing his fingers lightly against hers. "You're miles away," he said gently. "What's on your mind?" Laura hesitated, her fork pausing mid-air. "I'm happy," she whispered. "Happier than I thought I could be. But I'm also afraid. Afraid of what happens if people find out. Afraid of what we've started And how fragile it feels. Michael's jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed soft. I know it's not simple, he admitted. But happiness rarely is. Laura, I'd rather face the world's judgment with you than face a life without you. Her breath caught emotion swelling in her chest. She wanted to believe him, to let his certainty wash away her fear. And when he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. But as she looked into his eyes, she knew their story was only just beginning, and the path ahead would test them in ways neither could yet imagine. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Laura was in the garden trimming the roses when Mrs. Clark, her elderly neighbor, appeared by the fence. "You've been glowing lately," Mrs. Clark said with a knowing smile. "I almost didn't recognize you. It's been years since I've seen you this light." Laura forced a polite smile, but her heart skipped. She knew exactly why she seemed different, though she could never admit it. Later that day, when Michael stopped by to help mend the porch, Laura caught Mrs. Clark's curtains shifting. Someone was watching. Someone had noticed. That night, Laura paced the living room, her anxiety spilling over. "They'll start talking, Michael. They already are. I can feel it." Michael stepped toward her, his expression calm but determined. "Let them talk." "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't just about gossip. People will never approve. They'll twist everything we are into something ugly." He reached for her hands, grounding her with his steady touch. "Laura, we can't live our lives in fear of what people will say. What we have, it's real, and I won't let anyone's judgment take it away from us." Tears welled in her eyes, both from fear and from the fierce certainty in his voice. For years she had lived quietly, cautiously, never stepping outside the boundaries set by others. But with Michael, everything felt different. He wasn't afraid to face the world. He wasn't afraid to love her, no matter the cost. In his arms, she realized maybe she didn't have to be afraid anymore either. The weeks turned into months, and though whispers floated through the small town, Laura stopped letting them dictate her every breath. She walked beside Michael in the market. She laughed with him openly in the garden, and though some eyes lingered with judgment, others softened, seeing not scandal, but two people who had found light after years of shadows. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Laura stood on the porch with Michael's hand entwined in hers. She looked at him, really looked, and felt a peace she hadn't known in decades. "I never thought I'd get a second chance," she whispered. Michael turned to her, his smile warm, his eyes steady. "You didn't. You gave yourself one." Laura leaned into him, her heart no longer weighed down by fear. The storm that had once threatened to break her had instead carried her to this fragile, imperfect, beautiful love. And for the first time in so many years, she knew she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was truly living.